He asked me to pretend to be his fiancée. Then the billionaire CEO said something nobody expected. He was on one knee, in front of 200 strangers, in front of his entire family. And I had to smile, like I was in love with him. The problem, I had met this man exactly 47 minutes ago, and the secret I was carrying in that moment would have destroyed everything. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to go back with me, back to the beginning, because nothing about this story makes sense unless you understand where I started. And trust me, by the time this is over, your jaw is going to hit the floor. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories on this channel will leave you speechless every single time. And if you've been here before, you already know. Stay with me, because this one is different. Let's go back to 3 days before that moment. My name is Lily. 26 years old, single, broke enough to count every dollar before buying groceries. I worked 2 jobs, a barista in the morning, a data entry clerk at night. I wasn't complaining. I was surviving, and I was proud of that. I had a tiny apartment in Chicago, 1 window, a radiator that sounded like it was dying, and a best friend named Donna who called me every Sunday to remind me that I deserved better. I believed her. I just didn't know what better looked like yet. On a Thursday afternoon, I got a message. It came through a freelance app I barely used anymore. The kind of app where people hire you for odd jobs, proofreading, research, scheduling. Nothing fancy. The message said, "I need someone to accompany me to a formal family dinner this weekend as my fiancé. It is an acting role only. You will be paid $5,000 for 2 days. Professional conduct required. Discretion mandatory. Reply if interested." I stared at that message for a long time. $5,000. That was 3 months of rent. I told myself I was going to say no. Then I looked at my bank account, and I replied. His name was Daniel. Daniel Carter. 32 years old, tall, quietly handsome in the way that expensive suits make men look, not like they're trying, just like they were born that way. He had dark hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that was very calm, almost too calm, like a man who had learned a long time ago to never show what he was feeling. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. Neutral ground, he said. Smart. He explained everything clearly, like he was running a business meeting. His family was gathering in Connecticut for his grandfather's 80th birthday. His grandfather, his name was George Carter, was the founder of Carter Industries. Billionaire, old money, the kind of man whose opinion could move markets. George Carter was sick. Not dying, not yet, but the kind of sick that makes old men start thinking about legacy, about what they leave behind, about who carries the name forward. And George had one request. He wanted to see Daniel settled before his health got any worse. He wanted to see his grandson engaged, happy, building something real. Daniel was not engaged. Daniel was not happy. Daniel was, as he told me with absolutely no emotion on his face, focused on the company and unbothered by personal matters. But he loved his grandfather. And so here we were. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract, NDA, payment terms, a list of details I needed to memorize, how we met, how long we'd been together, what his favorite restaurant was, what I called him when we were alone. I looked up at him. "You've done this before," I said. Something moved behind his eyes, just for a second. "No," he said, "I haven't." I believed him. I don't know why, I just did. I signed the contract. And just like that, I became his fiancée. We spent Friday rehearsing. That's the only word for it, rehearsing. He took me through every family member I needed to know. His mother, Catherine, elegant, warm, but sharp as a blade underneath. His younger sister, Ashley, bubbly and loud and suspicious of everything. His uncle, Richard, George's other son, who had spent 30 years trying to prove he was better than Daniel's father ever was. And then there was George. Daniel talked about his grandfather differently than he talked about everyone else. Slower, quieter, like the words were fragile. He built everything from nothing, Daniel said. Literally nothing. He came to this country at 19 with $40 and a suitcase. He worked in a factory for 6 years. 6 years, Lily, before he saved enough to start a single small business. And from one small shop, he built all of this. He paused. He just wants to know it meant something, that someone is going to carry it forward, that I'm not going to be alone. I watched his face when he said that last part. Alone. There was something in that word that he hadn't meant to let out. I looked back down at the folder. I won't let you down, I said. He looked at me like that surprised him. Thank you, he said quietly. That was the moment I should have been more careful. Because somewhere between the signed contract and that quiet thank you, something had already started to shift inside me. I just didn't know it yet. We arrived in Connecticut on Saturday morning. The Carter estate was not a house. It was a statement. Stone walls, iron gates, a driveway that went on so long you had time to reconsider your entire life. And when the house itself finally appeared through the trees, it was the kind of building that made you feel small, not in a cruel way, just in the way that history makes you feel small, like you're standing next to something that existed long before you and will exist long after. I gripped my bag a little tighter. Daniel noticed. He reached over, without looking at me, and placed his hand over mine. Just for a second. You're going to be fine, he said. My heart did something I told it very firmly not to do. The family was already there. Catherine greeted us at the door. She hugged Daniel first tight like she'd been worried. Then she turned to me and her eyes did what every mother's eyes do. They scanned, measured, decided something. Then she smiled. Lily, she said, like she was tasting the name. Daniel told us so much about you. She took both my hands in hers. I'm so glad you're here, sweetheart. I smiled back. I was glad one of us knew what we were doing. Ashley appeared behind her mother, like a small hurricane. Oh my gosh, she's gorgeous, Daniel, how did you? Ashley. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Ashley. She grinned at me, completely unashamed. I'm going to like you, she announced. I can already tell. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in days. And then the room got quiet. Not suddenly, gradually, like a wave moving back from the shore. I turned around. George Carter was standing in the doorway of the sitting room. He was smaller than I expected. 80 years old will do that. But there was something about him, the way he stood, the way he looked at the room, that made him seem like the largest person there. He had Daniel's eyes. The same dark, steady, quiet eyes. He looked at Daniel first. Then he looked at me. And he smiled. It was the kind of smile that only old people can do. The kind that's seen so much of life that it holds everything, happiness and sadness and time, all at once. So, he said, his voice was slow and warm, this is the young woman who finally got through to my grandson. He walked toward us. He took my hand in both of his, the same way Catherine had, and I realized then where she'd learned it. You must be something special, he said softly. He never brings anyone home. I opened my mouth. And for one terrible second, I almost told him the truth. Because the way he looked at me, like I was already family, like I already mattered, was the most honest thing anyone had looked at me in a very long time. But I didn't. I smiled. He's pretty special too, I said. George squeezed my hand. Good answer, he whispered. And he winked. Dinner was beautiful. The long dining table was set with candles and flowers. The food was incredible. The conversation was warm. George sat at the head of the table and told stories that made everyone lean forward. Stories about when he arrived in America, about the factory, about saving every dollar, about the night he signed the lease on his first shop and his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the pen. I was terrified, he said. Absolutely terrified, but I thought, what is the worst that can happen? I fail, and then I start again. Fear is just your brain lying to you, telling you that failure is the end. It never is. I realized I had stopped eating. I was just listening. Across the table, Daniel was watching me. When I glanced at him, he looked away. After dinner, when the older guests had moved to the sitting room and Ashley had dragged Daniel off to look at something, I found myself alone on the back terrace. The Connecticut night was cool and clear, stars everywhere. I was thinking about George's words. Fear is just your brain lying to you. I heard the door open behind me. It was George. He walked slowly, with a cane I hadn't noticed earlier, and he stood beside me at the railing. We were quiet together for a moment. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. My stomach tightened. "What did you expect?" I asked. "Honestly," he chuckled softly, "someone more like Daniel, guarded, careful, someone who had learned to show nothing." He looked out at the dark garden. "You feel things," he said. "I can see it on your face, everything moves through you." He paused. "That's a gift, you know. Most people spend their whole lives building walls. You never built yours." I didn't know what to say. "He needs that," George said quietly. "My grandson, he's been so alone for so long. Since his father died, he just closed, like a door." He turned to look at me. "Until you." My chest ached. Because it wasn't true. And because some part of me desperately wished it was. "Mr. Carter." "George," he said firmly. "George," I took a breath. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why does this matter so much to you? His being with someone, why now?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm running out of time," he said simply. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And the only thing I'll regret, the only thing, is if I leave without knowing he's going to be okay." His voice was steady, but his eyes told the truth. "A man can build an empire," he said, "and still die with nothing if he's alone." I looked at this old man, this extraordinary, self-made, fierce, gentle old man, and I felt something crack open inside me. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to go back to Chicago and never have signed that contract. I did none of those things. I just said, "He's going to be okay, George, I promise." George looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. And that was the moment everything got so much harder. That night I couldn't sleep. Daniel and I had separate rooms. Of course we did. We were strangers. But the house was big and quiet, and my thoughts were loud. I kept seeing George's face. I kept hearing his voice. A man can build an empire and still die with nothing if he's alone. I kept thinking about Daniel, about the way he'd said the word alone earlier, about how he'd placed his hand over mine in the car, just for a second, like it was instinct. I grabbed my phone. I almost called Donna. Instead, I walked downstairs to get water. Daniel was already in the kitchen. He was sitting at the counter with a glass of something, just staring at the wall, jacket gone, tie loose, looking more like a real person than he had all weekend. He looked up when I came in. Neither of us said anything for a second. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "No." "Me neither." I got my water. I sat across from him, and for the first time all weekend there was no script, no folder, no character to play. "Your grandfather is incredible," I said. Something in Daniel's face shifted. "Yeah," he said softly, "he is. He really loves you." "I know." "Daniel," I hesitated, "does he know about this?" He looked at me. "No," he said, "he doesn't." "Does that bother you?" A long silence. "Every second," he said. I looked down at my glass. "Why didn't you just find someone real, someone you actually—" "Because there isn't anyone," he said simply. "There hasn't been for a long time." He paused. "And I didn't want to put someone through this, through my family, through all of this." He gestured vaguely at the grand house around us. It's a lot. You put me through it. You signed a contract. You wrote the contract. He almost smiled at that. Almost. I just didn't want him to worry, Daniel said quietly. That's all. He's sick and he's scared, and I just didn't want him spending whatever time he has left worrying about me. I looked at him across that quiet kitchen. This man who had walked into my life 4 days ago with a folder and a plan, and absolutely no idea what he was really doing. That's actually a really good reason, I said. He looked surprised again. Like kindness kept catching him off guard. Don't get soft on me, he said. Too late, I said. And this time, he did smile. A real one. Small and quick, like it surprised even him. And in that quiet kitchen, in the middle of the night, in a house full of sleeping strangers who thought I loved him, I realized I was in serious, serious trouble. Sunday morning. George's birthday celebration. The family gathered in the garden, fairy lights strung between the trees even in daylight, long tables, flowers everywhere, laughter. Ashley had organized a whole slideshow of George's life. Photographs from the factory, from the first shop, from the wedding, from Daniel's father as a little boy. I sat beside Daniel and watched George watch his own life play out on the screen. George was crying. Not loudly, just quietly, the way old people cry like they've earned it. I reached under the table and took Daniel's hand. He looked at me. I wasn't playing a role. He knew that. He held on. And then, after the slideshow, after the cake, after George had hugged every person at that table, he stood up. Everyone went quiet. He was holding a small glass. 80 years, he said. I have been given 80 years, and I have been given more than I ever deserved. He looked around the table. I have been given this family. His eyes landed on Daniel. I have been given a grandson who is stronger than he knows, braver than he shows, and better than he believes. Daniel's jaw tightened. And this weekend, George said, I have been given the chance to meet the young woman who sees what I see in him. He looked at me. My heart stopped. Lily, he said gently. Everyone was looking at me. Thank you for loving my grandson. You don't know what it means to me to see him happy. My eyes burned. I could not cry. I could not. I cried. Daniel put his arm around me. I let him. And then George said, Daniel, don't let this one get away. The table laughed. Daniel looked at me. And something in his eyes, something quiet and real and terrified, said something his mouth didn't. I looked away. Because I couldn't. It was after lunch when it happened. Daniel pulled me aside, around the corner of the house, away from everyone. His face was different. Serious in a new way, urgent. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay. My grandfather asked me this morning before everyone woke up. He asked me what my plans were, for the future, for us. I waited. I told him we were taking things slowly. He said, Daniel stopped. He ran a hand through his hair. He said he didn't have time for slowly. The air between us changed. Lily, he actually asked me if I was going to propose this weekend. My heart was pounding now. What did you say? I said I was thinking about it. Daniel. I know, but he looked at me and he said, his voice dropped. Don't be like your father, Daniel. Don't wait until it's too late. The silence was enormous. His father, I said slowly. What happened with his father? Daniel looked at me. He loved someone for years, never told her, never asked her, and then she was gone, married someone else, and he spent the rest of his life, he stopped. He died regretting it. I understood now. This wasn't just about an old man wanting to see his grandson happy. This was about a wound that had been in this family for decades. A warning passed down through years of silence. Don't wait, don't lose her, don't end up alone. Daniel, I said carefully, what are you saying? He looked at me for a long time. I don't know, he said. I genuinely don't know. He paused. I just know that this weekend was supposed to be simple, and it's not simple anymore. I wanted to say something. Something honest. Something brave. But before I could, Ashley appeared around the corner. Breathless, eyes wide. There you both are, she said. Grandpa's asking for you, both of you, right now. We looked at each other. Then we followed her. George was in the sitting room. Just him. The rest of the family seemed to have been gently moved elsewhere. He was sitting in the large armchair by the window. The afternoon light was falling across him, and he looked, for the first time all weekend, tired, like the celebrations had asked more of him than he'd wanted to show. He looked up when we walked in. Come sit, he said. We sat on the couch across from him. His hands were folded in his lap. His eyes were steady. I want to say something, he said, and I want you both to listen, really listen, not nod, not be polite, listen. Daniel nodded. George looked at me first. Lily, I have watched you all weekend. The way you listen, the way you care, the way you look at my grandson when you think no one is watching. My breath caught. I've been alive for 80 years, George said. I know what love looks like, and I know what pretending looks like. The room tilted. Daniel went very still beside me. George let the silence sit there for a moment. Then he said, quietly, gently, without any anger at all, I know this weekend wasn't real. If you could feel a heart shatter and fill at the same time. That's what happened to me in that moment. Daniel started to speak. Grandpa, Let me finish, George said. His voice was so calm. I knew within the first hour, a grandfather knows. He looked at Daniel. You have never once in your life looked at a woman the way you look at this one. That's not acting, Daniel. That's not a contract. He paused. The way you put your hand over hers in the car, the way you watch her when she's talking to your mother, the way you looked at her last night when she didn't know you were looking. Daniel said nothing. George turned to me. And you, Lily, the way you listened to an old man on a terrace last night like his stories were the most important thing in the world. The way you cried this afternoon, not because it was expected, because you actually felt it. He shook his head softly. That's not an actress, that's a person. I couldn't speak. What I'm trying to say, George said slowly, is that I don't care how this started. I care how it's going to end. He looked at us both. Because whatever this was when you arrived here, it isn't that anymore, and I think you both know it. The room was completely silent. Daniel looked at me. I looked at Daniel. And George said, Son, don't be like your grandfather. It took a second. Then it landed. We both stared at him. Your grandfather, Daniel said slowly. You mean you. George smiled. A sad, full, tender smile. I met a woman when I was 24, he said. The year I opened my first shop. She used to come in every morning, order the same thing. We talked every day for 2 years. He paused. I never told her. I kept thinking when the business is bigger, when I'm ready. He closed his eyes for just a moment. She moved away. I never saw her again. He opened his eyes. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman. I loved her. I did. But there is a room in my heart that has been empty for 60 years. He looked at his grandson. I built an empire, Daniel, and I have one regret. He stood up slowly. He walked to Daniel. He put his hand on the side of his grandson's face. The way you touch someone you made, someone you love beyond words. Don't wait, he said. Then he walked out of the room and left us alone. The silence lasted a long time. Neither of us moved. I was staring at the floor. My hands were trembling. Lily. Daniel's voice was different now. All the careful control was gone. I looked up. I know this isn't what you signed up for, he said. I know this is insane. I know we've known each other less than a week, and I have absolutely no right to say any of this, but... He stopped. He took a breath. That night in the kitchen, that was real. Whatever I felt sitting across from you in that kitchen at 2 in the morning, that was the most real thing I've felt in years, and I think you know that. I couldn't move. I'm not asking you to pretend anymore, he said. I'm done pretending. I'm asking you, really asking you. He shook his head. I don't even know what I'm asking. I just know I don't want you to get in that car tomorrow and disappear. I looked at this man. This guarded, careful, lonely, brilliant man who had hired me to play a role and somehow ended up showing me exactly who he really was. And I thought about everything George had said. A man can build an empire and still die with nothing. I thought about my tiny apartment in Chicago, my 2 jobs, my 1 window, the radiator that sounded like it was dying. I thought about how none of that had felt like home, not really, until I sat across from a stranger in a coffee shop and something in me said, "This is interesting. Pay attention." "Daniel," I said. "Yeah." I didn't feel nothing either. He looked at me. "In that kitchen," I said, "I felt everything." And then neither of us said anything for a while. Because some things don't need words. We went back to the garden. George was sitting with Catherine, laughing at something Ashley had said. When he saw us walk out together, the way we were walking, something changed in him. His face opened up. All 80 years of it. He looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded, just once. George pressed his lips together. He looked up at the sky for a second. Then he looked at me. And he whispered, just to me, across the garden with his whole heart in it. "Thank you. Now, I need to tell you the part of this story I haven't told you yet. The part that changes everything. When I went back to my room that night to pack, I got a notification on my phone. It was from the freelance app. A review left by a new account on the job posting I had responded to. It said, "I want to let future applicants know this job is not what it appears. I was this man's girlfriend for 2 years. When his grandfather got sick, he ended things with me without explanation. 3 weeks later, this posting appeared. He didn't lose love. He chose to abandon it. Be careful." I read it 3 times. My hands stopped working. I walked downstairs. Daniel was in the hallway. He saw my face. "What's wrong?" I turned my phone around. I watched him read it. When he finished, he looked up at me. And his expression said everything. Not guilt. Not the guilty look of a man who'd been caught. Something else. Something sadder. "Her name was Victoria," he said quietly. "We were together for 2 years. I did end things." He paused. "Because she told my grandfather directly behind my back that she thought he should step down from the company board, that he was slowing things down. She told him he was old and the company needed to move forward without him." He stopped. "She said it to his face in this house at Christmas." The silence between us was different now. "He pretended it didn't bother him," Daniel said. "But I saw his face. I saw what it did to him." His jaw was tight. "I ended it the next day. I never told anyone why. I couldn't explain it without it becoming a whole thing, without Grandpa finding out and feeling responsible." He looked at me. "So yes, I did exactly what she said, and I would do it again." I looked at this man, who had quietly protected a sick old man's dignity, who had swallowed the explanation and taken the blame, who had shown up here this weekend, not to deceive his grandfather, but to love him. I put my phone back in my pocket. "Okay," I said. "Okay. Yeah, okay." He stared at me. "You believe me," he said, like he wasn't used to that. "Yes," I said, "I believe you." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "I've never brought anyone here before. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. "I want you to know something else." "What?" He reached into his jacket pocket. He held something out to me. It was small, simple, beautiful. A ring, slender band, single stone, the kind of ring that didn't try too hard. I stared at it. "I had this before you arrived," he said. I bought it before I even posted that listing. I don't know why, He stopped. I think part of me knew that whoever walked through that coffee shop door, whoever was brave enough to show up for a stranger, was someone I wanted to know. My throat was so tight I couldn't swallow. I'm not asking you to say yes right now, he said. That's not what this is. I just want you to know. He closed his hand around the ring again. I want you to know that what happened this weekend was real. For me, all of it. I looked up at him, and I said the most honest thing I had said all weekend. It was real for me, too. I did not go back to Chicago the next day. Not immediately. I stayed for one more morning. George and I had breakfast together, just the two of us on the terrace, while the house was still waking up. He told me more stories, about the factory, about coming to America, about fear and hope and starting over. And then he said, you know what the best investment I ever made was? The first shop, I guessed. He shook his head. Believing people, he said, giving them the benefit of the doubt, trusting that most people most of the time are trying their best. He looked at me. Are you going to be okay, Lily? I thought about everything. The contract, the kitchen, the terrace, the ring. The woman who wrote the review, who had been hurt and was trying, in her own way, to protect someone. The man inside that house who had spent years being careful and had finally, terrifyingly, stopped. Yeah, I said, I think I'm going to be more than okay. George smiled. That full, old everything in its smile. Good, he said. He reached over and patted my hand. Come back soon. That was 14 months ago. A lot has changed. I still live in Chicago, but I don't have 2 jobs anymore. And the apartment has more than 1 window now. Daniel and I took it slowly, slower than that weekend would suggest was possible. Coffee, then dinner, then weekends, then something that stopped feeling like a question and started feeling like an answer. George is still with us. Still sharp, still telling stories, still insisting everyone sit down and listen. Last month, he and I sat on that same terrace. He asked me if I was happy. I told him yes. He asked if Daniel was happy. I said he was working on it. George laughed, long and real and full. That's all any of us can do, he said. I have thought a lot about that review. About Victoria and the hurt that made her write it. I don't blame her. Losing someone without knowing why, that's one of the loneliest feelings in the world. I hope she found her answer somewhere. I hope she found her terrace, and her old man full of stories, and her quiet kitchen at 2 in the morning. I think everyone deserves that. And you, if you've made it this far. You've just watched this whole story. Which means you felt something. Maybe it was the moment in the kitchen. Maybe it was George on the terrace. Maybe it was the ring. Maybe it was just the feeling of 2 people letting their guards down in a house that wasn't theirs, in a weekend that wasn't supposed to matter, finding something real. That's what these stories are for. To remind you that life is stranger and more beautiful than we plan. That love doesn't arrive on schedule. That the bravest thing you can do, sometimes, is show up for a stranger. If this story moved you even a little, share it. Right now. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. You know exactly who that person is. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Because there are more stories where this came from. Stories that will sit with you. Stories that will make you call someone you've been meaning to call. I'll see you in the next one.